Good afternoon. We're going to be speaking through 5 short little talks on a prayer of St. Ignatius of Loyola called the Examen prayer. 5 little talks because there are 5 points to it, and each talk will cover one of the 5 points. So first today, we'll do a little overview of the prayer itself, and then we'll talk about the first point. And so as an overview, St. Ignatius believed that this prayer of the Examen was of vital importance to those first Jesuits. St. Ignatius died in 1556, and also those who sought to live that spirituality that St. Ignatius developed in the spiritual exercises. In instructions to Jesuits, he said that if on a certain day, if your day gets so filled with different activities that you can't withdraw from, which leaves an insufficient amount of time for your daily 1-hour prayer, Ignatius said, well, if need be, you can miss prayer that day, but what you can't do is miss the Examen prayer. So for him, it was of vital necessity that you keep this prayer as part of every day. The Examen prayer itself, it's relatively brief. I would say no less than around 5 minutes or so, and probably no more than 10 minutes. So it's quite short. And in busy schedules, it's a prayer that we can fit in, being that it's relatively short. The Examen prayer itself is a prayer in which we use our memory. And so it covers a 24-hour period. Usually it's done at night, sort of in the evening or before one goes to bed. And you just look at the past 24 hours, or maybe from the moment of rising that day till that point in which you're making the Examen prayer in preparation to go to bed. And Ignatius says you just go through your day hour by hour. That is, you recall to your memory all those different events that happened. In those different events, it could be our interactions with others. It could be those relationships that we have, those friendships. It could be conversations. It could be our thoughts. It could be our feelings. It could be the things we saw in the world. It could be the things that were done to us, the things that we did to others. And so the content is that 24-hour period. And then you look at those events, those relationships, those people, those thoughts, those words, those actions, and you try and remember what the movement was within you at the time. That is, did it give us an experience of consolation, or did it give us an experience of the opposite, of desolation? Were those experiences life-giving, consolation, or were those experiences the opposite? They limited life. For St. Ignatius, this Examen prayer, I think, has 2 purposes. The first purpose is the one that is more commonly thought of. It is of discernment, trying to discern God's will for the person. And so through those experiences of consolation, what gives life, those experiences of desolation, what limits life, then we discern to have more of that consolation, those activities, those conversations, those people, those thoughts, whatever it may be, that we seek then to give greater emphasis to those, to have those more present in our lives. And just so with the opposite, those things that leave us desolate, those things that sort of lead us to sinfulness, then we want to be, as much as we can through God's grace, to be free of them, to grow in freedom from them. For St. Ignatius, this notion that God has a will for us, or maybe how I understand it, that God has a dream for us. You can see that in his recuperation from his wound from the Battle of Pamplona, in which Ignatius has an understanding of what will fulfill his life. And so he daydreams about being something like a knight and winning glory and honor, doing great things in the eyes of others. And after he would finish daydreaming about these different scenarios, he wrote in his autobiography that it would leave him feeling happy. However, that feeling, that positive feeling, he began to notice that it was for a relatively short period of time. And then he would feel empty, he would feel desolate. And then he would also imagine doing great things for God. So not according to the eyes of the world, but the eyes of God. He would think to himself, well, if St. Francis did this, I imagine myself doing something similar. Or St. Dominic, or some other saint. And then when he was finished doing those daydreams of doing great things for God, he realized that he had the same feeling within him. That is, he felt good, he felt consoled. However, he noticed a difference. And the difference between daydreaming about doing great things in the eyes of the world versus doing great things in the eyes of God is that when he daydreamed about doing great things for God, that consolation remained with him. It didn't leave like it did when he imagined doing great things in the eyes of the world. And so therefore, over time, he began to realize the reason why. Well, because God had a dream for him. And that dream for him was to become St. Ignatius of Loyola. That is, to live a life dedicated in service and praise of him. And so then, in a similar way, we try and discern within our day of what God's will is for us, what's God's dream for us. And the Examen is not about controlling our lives. It's not about controlling our different whims or appetites, but rather it is seeking to cooperate more with God. And so if God has a dream for us, then we seek to cooperate or to bring to greater realization this dream that God has for us. Because God's will for us or God's dream for us, it is that which fills us. It is that which makes us not merely happy, but it makes us filled with joy. It brings peace to us. We have a clarity, if you will, that it fits us. And so then, for the first point of the Examen prayer, I should say before getting to that, the second reason for the Examen is to realize how God is present in our lives. That God isn't present with us just when we're at Mass on Sunday, but God is present with us every moment of every day. And God is showering His grace upon us. And so for me, the second reason of the Examen is through realizing God is present, realizing that God in His love is active, which then elicits from us, ideally, a loving response. Seeing that God serves us, we want to try and serve God back. And so that first point of the Examen. The first point is very basic. That is, maybe a chair in our room or our home, or maybe it's going for a walk. Whatever way we do it, The first point is to realize or remember that we're in God's presence, that God sees us, that God is with us. And so therefore it's not just an exercise of our memory, but through that exercise of our memory with the presence of God, it becomes a prayer. And so the first point for us, and to do the Examen prayer, is that however or whatever place we do it, it is to remember or to realize that like every moment of every day, that God is present. That we do this prayer in the very presence of God, because we are trying to see that which God has given, and also to see within ourselves those moments or times in which we've turned our back on what God has given. That is, turning our back on Him. And so the first point of the 5 points is to remember or to realize that you're in the presence of God. Our next talk will be on the second point, which is the little prayer we offer at the beginning. God bless and thank you.